For more than 2 years, the young son of a billionaire suffered from strange and unexplained health problems. He was always tired, rarely smiled, had constant headaches, refused to eat properly, and experienced frequent tremors. Countless doctors couldn't find a clear cause. Several nannies came and went without answers, leaving suddenly and in silence. But everything changed when a new maid, hired to care for the boy, started noticing things others had ignored. She became suspicious of the house's routines and started her own quiet investigation. One afternoon, while examining the boy's blanket, she discovered something hidden deep inside the fabric that finally explained everything. And what she found left the entire family in shock. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Emily Carter had just started her new job at the home of Jonathan Miller. She had been hired to help take care of his 6-year-old son, Ethan. From her first day, she noticed that something was very wrong with the boy. Ethan didn't eat properly. Jonathan mentioned that this had been going on for over 2 years. Emily could see that Ethan often looked tired and sick. He had headaches, felt nauseous, and his hands sometimes shook. He also spent a lot of time lying down or sitting quietly, not interested in playing or talking. That morning, Emily watched as the housekeeper, Helen Morris, brought hot chocolate for Ethan. Instead of enjoying it, Ethan pushed the cup away and looked upset. Emily was surprised. It seemed strange for a child to react like that to something sweet. Jonathan stayed close to his son, looking very tired. He didn't talk much, but watched Ethan closely, as if he was waiting for something bad to happen. Emily learned that 5 other nannies had worked in the house before her, but none of them stayed. No one explained why they left, which made her feel uneasy. She began writing down the things she noticed about Ethan. She wanted to keep track of his symptoms and try to understand what was happening to him. She felt that this situation was not normal. When Ethan had a sudden and intense health crisis in front of her, she saw Jonathan become very worried. He didn't hesitate and said they needed to take Ethan back to the hospital. This made Emily realize that Ethan had already been hospitalized before. The way Jonathan reacted showed that he was used to these emergencies. It also showed how serious Ethan's condition was. Emily had worked with children before, but she had never seen anything like this. She began to think more deeply about the boy's situation and what could be causing his illness. Helen Morris was a serious and strict woman. She had worked in Jonathan's house for a long time and followed strict routines. She made sure everything in the house was in order. Helen also watched everyone carefully. She seemed to pay special attention to what Emily did. At first, Emily thought Helen was just doing her job. But as the days passed, she noticed that Helen's behavior was more than just professional. Helen often stood in doorways, listening quietly. She asked Emily a lot of questions, even personal ones. Emily started to feel uncomfortable around her. Helen also spent a lot of time with Ethan, especially when Jonathan wasn't home. Emily wondered if Helen's way of handling things was affecting the child. There was something about Helen's presence that made the house feel tense. Emily couldn't stop thinking that Helen might be part of the reason why Ethan wasn't getting better. Emily's concern grew as she spent more time in the house. She paid attention to small things, how Ethan reacted to certain foods, sounds, and even smells. She noticed that his symptoms became worse at specific times of the day. It didn't make sense. She began to question whether something inside the house could be causing the problem. It wasn't just about Ethan's body. Maybe something in the environment was making him sick. The more she thought about it, the more she became suspicious. Why had 5 other nannies left without saying anything? Why didn't Jonathan have answers? And why did Helen seem to always be there, watching and controlling everything? Emily didn't want to make accusations without proof, but she couldn't ignore her instincts. Something wasn't right in that house, and she had to find out what it was before things got worse for Ethan. Even though Emily was still new to the job, she felt responsible for Ethan. She couldn't just watch him suffer without trying to help. Jonathan looked like a man who had already tried everything but had no strength left. He seemed lost and confused. Emily knew she had to be careful. If she pushed too hard, Helen might turn against her, or Jonathan might ask her to leave like the others. So she decided to stay quiet for now and keep observing. She wrote down everything: what Ethan ate, how he reacted, and when he had pain. She also started paying attention to how Helen behaved when no one was looking. Emily didn't trust her, but she needed more information. She wanted to understand how this house worked, how the people inside it lived, and what could be hurting Ethan. Emily was determined to stay and help, no matter how strange or difficult things became. The house itself felt heavy. It was big and quiet, but not peaceful. There was a strange feeling in the air, like something hidden. Emily had never believed in bad energy before, but here she started to feel it. Every room seemed to carry secrets. The way Helen ran the house made everything feel controlled and cold. There were no happy sounds, no laughter, and no signs of a normal childhood for Ethan. Emily couldn't understand how a 6-year-old boy could live like this and not get worse, but he was getting worse, and she knew it. She had a growing fear that the house, and maybe the people in it, were part of the cause. Still, Emily didn't want to leave like the others. She wanted to stay and try to protect Ethan. She knew it would be hard, but she was ready to face the truth, whatever it was, as long as it meant helping the child get better. At the hospital, Emily had a chance to talk with one of the nurses, Valerie Brown. She asked Valerie about Ethan's past hospital stays and what the staff had noticed before. Valerie remembered seeing 2 of Ethan's old nannies. She said they looked very scared. They didn't say much, but something about their behavior seemed off. Valerie also shared a personal suspicion. She believed that Helen, the housekeeper, might have been doing something to Ethan's food. Valerie didn't have proof, but she said things didn't feel right. Emily listened carefully and took mental notes. It was a lot to think about. She was already suspicious of Helen, but hearing this from someone else made those feelings stronger. Emily felt more worried, but also more sure that she had to help Ethan. There was something going on that needed to be uncovered. She couldn't ignore what she had heard, especially now that someone else was also unsure about Helen's role in the boy's condition. Later that day, Dr. Marshall came to speak with Jonathan and Emily. He said that after seeing Ethan's symptoms and hearing about his condition, he wanted to run more tests. He thought they needed to check if something in Ethan's body could be causing the problems. One of the tests he requested was a toxicology exam. A few days later, the first results came back. Everyone was shocked when they learned that sedatives had been found in Ethan's blood. It was a serious discovery. Emily felt angry and afraid. She couldn't believe a child had been given something that could make him sick like that. Jonathan looked confused and upset. He didn't know what to think, too. Dr. Marshall explained that more tests would be done to find out how often the drugs had been used. Emily now had more reason to worry about what was happening in that house. This new information made her feel that her suspicions were becoming real. Jonathan had trouble accepting the results. He found it hard to believe that someone close to him could be hurting his son. To him, Helen had always been part of the family. She had worked in the house for many years, and he trusted her. The idea that she could be involved in anything harmful was difficult for him to understand. He didn't want to think that someone he had relied on might be responsible for Ethan's suffering. Emily tried to stay calm. She didn't push him to believe anything right away, but she could see that Jonathan was struggling. He kept asking questions, trying to find other explanations. Maybe the lab made a mistake, or maybe the medicine had come from somewhere else. Emily didn't argue with him, but she knew they couldn't ignore the facts. She hoped he would soon realize that they had to take action. Ethan's health was the most important thing, and now they had some clues that could not be denied. One afternoon, Emily received an anonymous message. It was short and clear. The message told her to leave the job immediately. There was no name, no explanation, and no way to know who had sent it. Emily felt nervous after reading it. Someone knew what she was doing. Someone was trying to scare her. She didn't know if the message came from inside the house or from someone else connected to the situation. When she showed it to Jonathan, he looked worried too. He then shared something that made Emily think even more. He said that one of Ethan's previous nannies had quit in the middle of the night. She had left suddenly, saying she was afraid. She didn't give more details. Jonathan said he thought it was strange at the time, but now, after everything happening with Ethan, he was starting to see things differently. Emily realized that there had been signs all along, but nobody had put the pieces together before. As days passed, Ethan began to feel a little better. He was still weak, but now that he was away from the house, some of his symptoms were slowly improving. Jonathan noticed the change too. He stayed close to his son and started to believe that maybe something at home really was affecting Ethan. Because of this small improvement, Jonathan agreed to keep Ethan in the hospital for more days. He wanted to be careful. He also wanted to give the doctors more time to observe Ethan and see what else they could find. Meanwhile, Emily kept thinking about what to do next. She didn't want to just wait at the hospital. She felt that answers could be found only by looking at what was happening inside the house. She had a plan. She knew it was risky, but she believed it was necessary. If they wanted to find out the truth, someone had to go back and watch Helen closely. Emily offered to return to the house by herself. She told Jonathan that she would act like everything was normal. She would follow the same daily routine as before and pretend that nothing had changed. This way, she hoped to observe Helen without raising suspicion. Jonathan was unsure at first, but Emily explained that it was the only way they could discover if Helen had been doing something wrong. She promised to be careful. She would not eat anything Helen gave her and would keep her phone close in case of emergency. Emily wanted to find evidence, not just suspicions. She needed to see something clear that could prove what was happening to Ethan. She knew that being in the house alone would be difficult, but she was ready. She cared about Ethan and wanted to protect him. She walked out of the hospital with a serious mind, heading back to the place where everything had started to fall apart. Back at the house, Emily returned with a different mindset. She was no longer just a nanny. Now she was also someone trying to find answers. She entered the house calmly, making sure not to show any change in her behavior. She greeted Helen politely and followed her usual tasks. Every move Helen made, Emily paid close attention. She watched how Helen handled Ethan's meals, where she walked in the house, and how she acted when no one was talking to her. Emily avoided eating or drinking anything Helen prepared, even if it was offered kindly. She was careful not to make it obvious. She made sure her actions didn't raise suspicion. She kept her notebook close, taking notes only when alone. Emily wanted to understand how things worked in the house without being noticed. She tried to remember the smallest details. Even though she was nervous inside, she kept a quiet and friendly attitude around Helen. She knew she had to be smart. When Helen went out to run errands, Emily saw a chance. She waited a little, then moved quickly toward the kitchen. She opened drawers and checked cabinets. She looked through the pantry and even checked behind the cans and spice jars. Then, in the back corner of a high shelf, hidden behind containers that looked old and unused, she found something strange. It was a small bottle with no label. Inside it, there was a white powder. Emily didn't touch it directly, but she looked closely. The bottle didn't belong with the usual cooking items. It was clearly hidden, placed where nobody would find it by accident. Her heart started to race, but she tried to stay calm. She closed everything the way it was and left the kitchen without making a sound. She didn't take the bottle. She didn't want Helen to know it had been found. Emily returned to the living room as if nothing had happened at all. When Emily came back into the room, Helen was already there. She was sitting on the couch, looking directly at her. Her eyes stayed on Emily for a bit longer than usual. Emily smiled and acted relaxed. She didn't mention the kitchen or anything she had seen. Helen began talking in a calm voice, but there was something different in her tone. She started to talk about the other nannies who had worked there before. She said most of them were too talkative or careless. Then she said she liked Emily's quiet way of working. Helen called it discreet and said it was rare to find someone who didn't cause problems. Emily just nodded and listened. Helen continued, saying she had been close to Jonathan for a very long time. She had helped take care of him after his wife died and had stayed by his side ever since. Helen spoke like she knew everything about his life and didn't want other women around. As Helen kept talking, Emily noticed something else in her words. There was jealousy in the way she spoke about Jonathan's past relationships. Helen didn't say anything directly mean, but it was clear she didn't like the women Jonathan had dated. She said they weren't right for the house or didn't understand how things worked. Emily began to understand that Helen had a lot of control over the daily routine in the house. She wasn't just the housekeeper. She had a strong influence over Jonathan and how things were done. Helen seemed proud of her position and didn't hide her dislike for change. She made it clear that she didn't trust outsiders. Emily stayed calm and didn't argue. She didn't want to say anything that would make Helen suspicious. She pretended to agree and kept the conversation polite. But inside, she was more certain than ever that Helen was hiding something important and possibly dangerous. Emily now felt that she had entered a very delicate situation. She had to balance two roles, being a nanny and being someone quietly looking for the truth. She couldn't let Helen know she was suspicious. She couldn't make any mistakes that would make Helen doubt her loyalty. Emily decided to act normal for the rest of the day. She kept her tone kind and neutral. She helped with light tasks and stayed away from the kitchen unless Helen was there. She knew the white powder could be the key to understanding what had happened to Ethan, but she also knew that moving too fast could ruin everything. She had to collect more clues. She had to watch and wait. Emily didn't feel safe, but she didn't show it. She had come this far, and she was not going to back away now. Her focus was on protecting Ethan and finding out exactly what had been happening inside that house all this time. Emily spent the evening in her room, thinking about the day. She reviewed every word Helen had said and every move she had made. The way Helen looked at her, the way she talked about the other nannies, and the strange bottle in the kitchen all pointed to the same thing. There was something wrong in that house, and Helen was at the center of it. Emily wrote down everything in her notebook, including the location of the bottle and the way it had been hidden. She made a plan to speak with Jonathan soon, but knew it wasn't the right time yet. She had to be sure before showing him anything. If she moved too soon, Helen might cover her tracks or even turn Jonathan against her. Emily felt the pressure of the situation growing, but she reminded herself why she was doing this. Ethan was still in the hospital, starting to get better. That gave her hope and the strength to continue. Emily knew that waiting and watching would not be enough anymore. She had already found something strange in the kitchen, but she wanted to go further. She felt that if something harmful was being done to Ethan, it might be closer to him than anyone thought. That idea led her to Ethan's bedroom. She decided it was time to carefully search the room, especially the things Ethan used every day. She didn't want to move too fast or disturb anything important, so she walked in slowly and looked around. One object stood out, the heavy blanket that Ethan used all the time. It was always with him, even when he felt weak or sick. Emily ran her hands over the blanket and felt something strange inside. She noticed an odd section in one corner. The stitching didn't look like the rest. It looked like it had been sewn by hand, and not very neatly. That made her suspicious. She took a pair of scissors and started cutting slowly. Emily opened the stitched area carefully. She didn't want to damage the blanket too much, and she had to work quietly. Inside the fabric, she found a small cloth bag, hidden deep within the padding. She pulled it out slowly and opened it. What she saw made her feel cold inside. The bag contained a white powder, the same kind of powder she had seen earlier in the kitchen. But that wasn't all. There were also strands of blonde hair inside. The hair looked like it belonged to a child, and Emily had no doubt it was Ethan's. Along with the powder and the hair, there was something else. It was an old photograph that had been torn in half. The half she found showed a young Jonathan as a child, standing next to a younger Helen. The photo looked old and worn. It had probably been hidden in the blanket for a long time. Emily stared at it, trying to understand what it all meant. She knew she had to act fast. Emily couldn't just leave the items lying around. She had to hide them before anyone saw. But before she could do anything, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Her heart started beating faster. She recognized the sound. It was Helen. A few seconds later, Helen opened the bedroom door and walked in. Her eyes quickly went to the blanket, which was now clearly out of place. Then she saw the scissors in Emily's hand and the cut in the fabric. Helen didn't say anything at first. She looked around the room slowly, taking in every detail. Emily tried to stay calm. She stood up and began to speak, hoping to explain what she was doing in a way that didn't sound suspicious. But it was clear that Helen already knew something was wrong. Her eyes were sharp, and her face grew tight. She stepped closer, not taking her eyes off Emily or the blanket. Helen walked closer and looked directly at the cut in the blanket. She didn't need to ask what Emily had found. Her eyes showed that she already knew. She noticed the scissors and then looked back at Emily. Her voice was calm at first, but there was tension behind every word. She asked what Emily was doing in the room and why she had touched the blanket. Emily tried to explain, saying she was just checking on the room or making sure things were clean. But it was clear Helen didn't believe her. She crossed her arms and gave a short laugh without humor. Then she mentioned the other nannies again. She said they had made similar mistakes, trying to do things they weren't supposed to do, going into places they should have stayed out of. Her tone was cold now. Helen was no longer pretending to be friendly. She was angry and maybe even afraid of what Emily might know now. Emily stood still, trying to decide what to say next. She knew that anything she said could make the situation worse. Helen was clearly upset and watching her closely. Emily couldn't lie too much, or Helen would catch it. But she also couldn't tell the full truth. She couldn't say that she had found the bag or the powder, not yet. So she said she had noticed something strange with the blanket and wanted to fix it. She said she didn't mean to cause any problems. Helen didn't look convinced. Her eyes stayed locked on Emily, and her face grew even more serious. She didn't yell, but the anger was clear in her expression and her voice. She talked more about the past nannies, how they had been curious and how that curiosity had made them leave. Helen seemed to be warning her. Emily realized this was not just a normal argument. The situation had turned dangerous. She had to be very careful now. The tension in the room was heavy. Helen didn't move from her spot near the bed. Emily didn't move either. Both women stood in silence for a moment, thinking about what would happen next. Helen spoke again, this time more directly. She said some people didn't understand how the house worked. She said some people came into the home thinking they could change things, but they didn't last. Emily didn't answer. She didn't want to say anything that would cause Helen to act out. She looked down and nodded slowly, trying to seem respectful and harmless. Inside, her mind was racing. She still had the bag hidden behind her back, and she needed a chance to hide it properly or get it out of the room. She didn't know what Helen would do next, but she could feel the risk growing. Helen knew Emily had found something. Now Emily had to protect herself and find a way to use the evidence to help Ethan. The situation in the room quickly became more serious. Helen didn't try to pretend anymore. Her face changed. She was no longer calm or collected. She looked directly at Emily and started to speak in a sharper, louder voice. What she said shocked Emily. Helen admitted that she had been keeping Ethan in a weak and sick state on purpose. She said it clearly. She didn't want Jonathan to move forward with his life. She didn't want him to make plans without her. Helen said that if Ethan stayed unwell, Jonathan would stay close and focus only on the boy. Then she took a step further and said something even worse. She told Emily that she had once adjusted the brakes of Jonathan's wife's car. That had caused the fatal crash years ago. Emily stood still, trying to understand what she was hearing. She felt frozen for a moment. Helen looked proud and angry at the same time. She wasn't hiding her actions anymore. It was all out now. Emily felt danger growing fast. Helen reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bottle. It looked exactly like the one Emily had seen earlier in the kitchen. Helen told her it was a sedative and that it would calm things down. She began moving toward Emily, holding the bottle as if she planned to use it. Emily stepped back and told her to stop, but Helen didn't listen. Her eyes looked cold and determined. Emily knew she had to act fast. She tried to grab the bottle before Helen could use it. That's when the struggle started. Helen held on tightly, and they began to fight. The bottle slipped out of Helen's hand and rolled across the floor. Both of them moved toward it, pushing past each other. A chair tipped over. A lamp fell and broke. The room became a mess as the fight continued. Emily tried to push Helen away, but Helen was strong and angry, not holding back. Emily managed to reach the bottle, but Helen grabbed her arm and pulled her back. They struggled again, this time harder. Emily's hair was pulled, and she screamed. She tried to crawl to the door, but Helen pulled her by the leg, dragging her away. The room was completely out of order now. A table had fallen sideways, and the curtains had been pulled down. Emily felt pain in her shoulder from the force of the pulling, but she didn't stop fighting. She knew that if Helen gave her the sedative, she might lose her chance to tell Jonathan the truth. Helen kept yelling that Emily should have stayed out of things, that she should have never gone through Ethan's room. Emily kept trying to get to the door, hoping someone would come. She hit Helen's arm and kicked the floor to move herself closer. But Helen was blocking the exit, making it impossible to escape without a serious fight. The fight continued for what felt like several minutes. Both women were tired, but neither gave up. Helen was sweating and breathing heavily, but her face showed no kindness. She was focused on stopping Emily. Emily reached for anything she could use to protect herself, but most objects had already fallen during the fight. The bottle rolled under the bed. Helen moved to get it, but Emily pulled her back. Then they both fell again, landing hard on the floor. Just when it seemed Helen might overpower Emily, a voice came from downstairs. It was Jonathan. He was calling out Emily's name. The sound froze both women. Helen turned her head quickly toward the door. Her eyes were wide now. She hadn't expected him to be home. She hadn't heard him arrive. Her face turned pale, and she looked shocked. She stood up suddenly, not knowing what to do. Emily stayed on the floor, catching her breath and trying to think clearly again. Jonathan's voice grew louder as he climbed the stairs. He was calling for Emily again, sounding concerned. Emily stayed quiet for a second, still trying to catch her breath after the intense fight. Helen stood near the bed, looking panicked. She didn't speak or move at first. She just stared at the door, as if unsure what to do next. Her calm control was gone. The power she had over the situation had disappeared the moment she heard Jonathan's voice. Emily could see it clearly. Helen didn't have a plan anymore. She had counted on being alone in the house with Emily. Jonathan's arrival changed everything. Helen looked around, as if thinking of a quick excuse or a way out. Emily slowly stood up, still sore from the struggle. She didn't say anything yet, just kept her eyes on Helen. She knew the next few moments would be important. Jonathan was about to walk through the door and see what had really been going on. Jonathan stepped into the room and stopped at the sight in front of him. The furniture was out of place, items were broken, and both women looked worn out. He looked at Emily, then at Helen, trying to understand what had happened. Emily didn't speak right away. She waited to see how Helen would react. Helen didn't say a word either. She looked at Jonathan, and the panic on her face grew stronger. Her hands were shaking. The bottle was still under the bed, out of sight, but Emily knew it was there. The moment was tense and quiet. Jonathan's presence had stopped everything. The fight was over for now, but the truth was in the room. Emily knew she would finally be able to tell him everything, about the powder, about Ethan's condition, and about Helen's confession. Helen, once so confident and in control, was now frozen. She had been caught in the middle of her actions, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. Jonathan entered the room and stopped when he saw the mess. The furniture was overturned, the blanket was cut open, and Emily looked tired and hurt. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair was messy, and she had a small injury on her arm. She looked like she had been in a real fight. Jonathan's eyes scanned the floor until he saw a small bottle lying near the bed. He picked it up and looked at it. It was the same kind of bottle that had been found before, the one suspected of containing something harmful. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He had heard enough already. Emily had left her phone connected during the confrontation, and Jonathan had heard part of the argument, and even Helen's confession. He had been worried and rushed back home. Now, standing in that room, holding the bottle, he felt both angry and shocked. The truth was clear now, and there was no way to ignore it anymore. Jonathan turned to Helen. His voice was firm. He asked her to explain everything, but he didn't wait for her answer before speaking again. He told her that he had already spoken to several people, including the hospital nurses and the previous nannies who had left without saying much at the time. Now they were willing to talk. Their stories all matched. They had spoken of threats, strange rules, and moments that made them feel unsafe. Some had mentioned seeing Helen do suspicious things with food or medicine. Jonathan had also noticed how Ethan improved outside the house. All of this made him realize the truth. He didn't want to believe Helen was responsible for harming his son, but now it was impossible to deny. He said everything aloud, making sure Helen understood how serious the situation had become. He was no longer confused. He no longer doubted. The facts were there, and he had to act before anything worse happened. Helen tried to respond. Her voice was shaky, but she still tried to defend herself. She said that everything she had done came from a place of love. She talked about her years with the family, about how she had been there since Jonathan was young. She said she had only wanted to protect the family from outsiders who didn't care enough. Helen said she had watched over Ethan like a guardian, making sure he stayed close and making sure Jonathan didn't forget about her. But Jonathan didn't accept her words. He told her that love doesn't mean control, and that no one has the right to hurt another person to feel needed. He was done listening. He picked up his phone and called the authorities. He didn't hesitate. He gave them a full explanation and asked them to come to the house. Emily sat quietly nearby, watching everything, still in pain but relieved that the truth was finally being exposed and taken seriously. Soon after the call, a lawyer and a doctor arrived at the house. Jonathan met them at the door and brought them upstairs. The doctor checked Emily's injuries first. He asked her a few questions, looked at the bruises on her arms, and gave her a quick evaluation. Then he took notes for the report. The lawyer asked Jonathan and Emily to give their statements about what had happened. They described everything in detail, what was found in the blanket, what Helen had confessed, and how the fight had started. Meanwhile, the police came and began to collect evidence. They took the cut blanket, the small bottle, and other items that looked suspicious. They photographed the room, the mess, and all the objects on the floor. They asked a few questions too. Everyone in the house was serious and focused. No one joked or smiled. The situation was too serious. The officers followed proper procedures and made sure everything was documented. After the evidence was collected, the officers approached Helen. She didn't resist, but her face was pale and full of fear. She didn't say much. One of the officers read her rights, while another placed handcuffs on her wrists. She looked around the room one last time, but no one met her eyes. Jonathan stood by Emily's side, watching as Helen was led away. She was taken down the stairs and out the front door. The house was quiet again, but not peaceful. There was too much to think about. The weight of what had just happened was heavy. Emily leaned back against the wall, still holding her arm. Jonathan looked at her and asked if she was okay. She nodded slowly. The worst was over, but both of them knew it would take time to fully understand everything. Helen had lived with them for years. No one had imagined this ending. The truth had been hidden for so long. Jonathan and Emily went downstairs and sat in the living room. The house felt different now, still quiet, but not in the same way. It was as if the truth had changed the air. They didn't talk at first. They just sat in silence, thinking about Ethan, about the danger he had been in, and about how long it had gone unnoticed. Jonathan looked around the room and thought about how much trust he had given to Helen. He had never suspected she was capable of such things. Emily looked down at her hands, still trying to calm down. They had stopped something very serious, but the emotional weight was still there. They were both exhausted. Jonathan finally spoke. He said he was grateful that Emily had stayed strong. Without her, he might never have known the truth. Emily said she was just glad Ethan was safe. They didn't know what would happen next, but they knew one thing. Ethan's life would be different now. After spending several days in the hospital, Ethan finally returned home. His improvement was clear from the moment he walked in. He was more awake, more curious, and more willing to interact. His skin had more color, and he didn't seem as tired as before. The doctors had given him a strict food plan, and the hospital made sure his meals were clean and balanced. That had helped him a lot. Emily noticed he was walking more, asking questions, and even smiling a little. His eyes didn't look as dull as before. Jonathan was happy to see these changes too. He watched his son carefully and could tell something was different, in a good way. This gave him motivation to make bigger changes at home. He didn't want any part of the old life to remain, especially not things that reminded him of the past months. Jonathan wanted to make the house safe and healthy for Ethan, both physically and emotionally, starting immediately. One of the first things Jonathan did was change many items in the house. He went through the kitchen and removed all the food that had been stored before. He didn't want to take chances. He replaced everything with fresh ingredients and made sure only safe, approved items were kept. Then he looked at the furniture, bed linens, and other things that had been in daily contact with Ethan. If there was any doubt about something being connected to his son's sickness, Jonathan replaced it. He also brought in a team to deep clean every room. The goal was to start over, to create a new space where Ethan could feel well and relaxed. During this time, Jonathan's fiancée, Claire Bennett, began visiting more often. She had known about the situation and wanted to help. She showed care and patience with Ethan, talking to him gently and listening to his stories. Ethan seemed to enjoy her presence, responding to her with increasing comfort and interest. Claire didn't force her way into Ethan's life. She let things happen slowly. She spent time reading with him, asking about his toys and walking with him in the backyard. At first, Ethan was shy, but each day he opened up a little more. Jonathan noticed the bond forming and was pleased. He hoped that his family could finally begin to heal. Claire's visits became a regular part of their week. She often stayed for meals or helped with small tasks. As trust grew, so did her connection with the boy. At the same time, Emily's role in the household began to shift. Because she had proven herself during such a difficult time, Jonathan offered her a new position. It wasn't just about childcare anymore. He now saw her as someone reliable who could help manage the overall well-being of the home. Emily accepted the new role with gratitude and took on more responsibilities with care. She continued to focus on Ethan's recovery, step by step. Emily started planning a better daily routine for Ethan. She added structure to his day, with clear times for meals, rest, play, and learning. Instead of guessing what might help, she used the hospital's guidelines to build activities that supported his health. In the mornings, they did light stretching and simple games to build his strength. After lunch, they read books together. In the afternoon, Ethan had quiet time or creative tasks like drawing. He seemed to enjoy these small routines. Emily wrote down his progress each day and shared it with Jonathan. Everyone worked together to support the boy's return to normal life. The house, which once felt full of silence and stress, now had a different atmosphere. With Helen gone, the rooms felt more open and peaceful. There was more talking, more laughter, and more movement. Claire helped with decorations, adding color and comfort. Things weren't perfect, but they were changing, and they were moving in the right direction every day. Jonathan paid close attention to every detail. He made time for Ethan, even with work and responsibilities. He also supported Emily's ideas and trusted her judgment. The teamwork between him, Claire, and Emily made a big difference. They didn't rush anything, but they stayed consistent. As Ethan improved, he began sleeping better and eating with more interest. His energy came back slowly, and he started talking more about his thoughts and dreams. The changes were small but steady. At the same time, the police investigation continued. Officers had taken statements, gathered evidence, and were working through the case. Jonathan received regular updates, but he stayed focused on home life. He didn't want the case to take away the progress they had made. Emily still kept a close eye on Ethan's behavior, always making sure nothing unusual returned. With time, trust started to grow again in the house. The fear was fading. It was being replaced by a feeling of stability and quiet hope. As the days went by, a new rhythm took hold inside the home. Meals happened on time, Ethan had his routine, and everyone had a role in keeping things balanced. There were no more hidden tensions or strange rules. Jonathan spent time with Claire and Ethan together, and it felt natural. Claire became someone Ethan could depend on. Emily, with her calm and careful approach, made sure everything ran smoothly. She had earned not only Jonathan's trust, but also Ethan's. The boy began to laugh more, play longer, and even ask questions about school. Emily started preparing simple learning activities, not to pressure him, but to encourage curiosity. The dark past had not been forgotten, but it no longer controlled their lives. Instead of fear, there was now action, recovery, and connection. While the legal case moved forward in the background, inside the house, things were finally becoming normal. And for the first time in a long while, normal felt good for everyone. Helen remained in custody while she waited for her trial. During this period, she was required to give detailed statements to the authorities. Her confessions included everything she had done over the past few years. She explained how she had slowly poisoned Ethan over time, using small doses so that the symptoms would appear gradual and hard to trace. She also admitted to interfering with the car brakes of Jonathan's late wife, which had led to the fatal crash. The investigators recorded all of Helen's statements, and her testimony became part of the case file. Her words confirmed much of what Jonathan and Emily had already discovered. The facts were no longer just suspicions, they were now official. Helen's calm and emotionless manner during the interviews shocked some people involved in the case. Even though she spoke clearly and answered all questions, there was no sign of regret. The authorities continued their work, organizing the evidence and preparing for the next steps in the legal process. Emily was granted permission to visit Helen at the prison. The meeting was not emotional or personal. It was formal, and both women knew the importance of the conversation. Emily didn't go to forgive or comfort. She went to better understand what had happened. Sitting across from Helen in a quiet visitor room, she asked questions in a calm tone. Helen responded in the same way she had during her legal statements, without emotion. She explained her actions again, describing how she believed she was protecting the family in her own way. Emily listened without interrupting. She didn't try to argue. She focused on learning what had pushed Helen to go so far. The visit didn't bring closure, but it gave Emily more clarity. She left the prison knowing that Helen would remain in custody and would face trial soon. The visit also confirmed how important it had been to act when she did. It reminded her how close Ethan had come to real harm. After the prison visit, Emily returned to the house. When she arrived, she found Jonathan, Claire, and Ethan outside in the garden. They were spending time together, sitting on the grass and watching Ethan play. It was clear to Emily that the boy was more relaxed now. He smiled more often and moved with more energy. He seemed more connected to the people around him. Jonathan and Claire stayed close to him, but gave him space to explore and enjoy the day. Emily quietly joined them and observed how different everything looked now. The garden, once quiet and unused, was full of life. Ethan was now in a safer environment, and that made a big difference in how he behaved. Emily didn't mention the prison visit right away. It wasn't the time. She simply sat nearby and watched as the family interacted. The moment felt peaceful, and it showed how far they had come since the start of all the problems. Life inside the house continued with a calm routine. Each person had their role, and things happened on schedule. There were no signs of trouble, no sudden changes, and no more tension. Jonathan stayed updated on the case through regular messages from his legal team. The lawyers were careful and shared news only when something important happened. So far, the case was moving forward without delays. Jonathan focused most of his time on Ethan, helping him feel safe and rebuilding their bond. Emily continued to help with daily plans, including activities that supported Ethan's emotional growth. Claire also took part, making sure the environment remained warm and supportive. They all worked together, and the house became a more stable place each day. There were still hard memories, but those didn't control their actions anymore. The fear that had once been part of the daily routine was gone. In its place, there was structure, trust, and a sense of rebuilding that made everyone feel more secure. As part of the healing process, Jonathan decided to make final changes in the house. These were small but important adjustments. He wanted to reorganize the spaces that had once caused discomfort. The rooms connected to Ethan's worst symptoms were now redecorated. The heavy blanket was long gone, replaced with simple and clean bedding. The old furniture was either removed or rearranged to make the space feel new. Colors were changed, lighting was improved, and unnecessary items were taken out. Claire gave suggestions, and Emily helped carry them out. These changes were not just for style, they were about removing painful reminders and giving Ethan a new beginning in his own home. The goal was to make the house feel fresh, without the emotional weight it used to carry. Even Ethan noticed the difference. He seemed more comfortable in his room and more open to spending time in other parts of the house. The changes showed that progress was real, not just something they hoped for. As the weeks passed, the investigation continued to develop. New documents were collected, more people were interviewed, and the final stages of the case began. Everyone involved wanted justice to be done. Jonathan followed the progress closely, but kept his main focus on his son and the people at home. The atmosphere in the house stayed steady, with no surprises or major problems. For the first time in a long while, daily life felt normal. Ethan continued to improve, emotionally and physically. He showed signs of trust and joy that had been missing for a long time. Emily kept working with care, helping him with each step. Claire remained present, creating a strong connection with both father and son. Jonathan looked ahead with more hope. Even though the case was not finished, the hardest part seemed to be behind them. Together, they had faced something difficult and had come through it stronger. Now, they were building a life that felt real, safe, and peaceful again. The courtroom was quiet when the trial began. Helen sat across from the judge, while witnesses were called one by one. Emily was the first to speak. She described everything she had seen and heard while working in Jonathan's house. She talked about Ethan's symptoms, the discovery of the white powder, and the physical fight that had taken place in the bedroom. Her words were calm, but clear. After her, the other former nannies were called. They told their stories, explaining how they had left their jobs without saying much at the time because they had felt uncomfortable or afraid. Then the experts took the stand. Medical professionals and investigators explained that Ethan had been poisoned slowly over a period of more than 2 years. They also confirmed that the brake failure in Jonathan's late wife's car was not an accident, but the result of sabotage. All the testimonies and evidence pointed in one direction. Helen was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years in prison. After the trial ended and the sentence was announced, the people in Jonathan's household tried to move on. The most difficult part was over. Now, life could continue with more peace. Jonathan and Claire decided it was time to move forward with their plans. They set a date for their wedding and began preparing. Ethan was excited to be included. He was asked to be the page boy and was happy to be part of something positive. He helped pick out his outfit, trying on small suits and choosing the one he liked most. He also began practicing walking down the aisle and holding a small ring pillow. Emily helped him get ready, giving gentle instructions and support. The wedding planning gave everyone something to look forward to. It brought energy and joy into the house. Instead of focusing on the past, they were all thinking about the future. It was a new chapter, and everyone was part of it. Emily continued her daily work in the house, but she was also focused on her own goals. She had decided to go back to school and was now studying pedagogy. Every evening, after finishing her tasks with Ethan, she spent time reading and completing assignments. Jonathan supported her decision and made sure she had the time and space to study. Claire often encouraged her too, asking about her classes and offering help when needed. Despite her new academic commitments, Emily remained dedicated to Ethan's care. She kept his routine organized and followed his medical and emotional needs closely. Her experience in the house had taught her a lot, and her new studies helped her understand even more. The balance between work and education was not easy, but Emily managed it well. She felt proud of the progress she was making. Each day, she grew more confident in her future, while still being a strong part of the family's daily life and support system. The house itself went through more changes. Jonathan and Claire agreed that certain areas still carried memories that were too strong or negative, so they decided to make more adjustments. They replaced old furniture, changed colors in the rooms, and bought new decorations. The goal was to create a home that reflected their new life. Ethan's room got special attention. He chose some items himself, like bed sheets with his favorite colors and new toys. The kitchen, living room, and even the hallways were updated to feel brighter and more welcoming. Nothing was rushed, and every change was done with care. Emily helped plan the organization, making sure everything stayed practical for Ethan's needs. The house slowly became a place where everyone felt comfortable. It no longer felt like a place full of tension or secrets. It felt like a real home, safe and warm. These changes, though simple, had a big impact. They helped everyone continue healing and focusing on the future instead of the past. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan's behavior continued to improve. His health was more stable, and the symptoms that had once worried everyone became less and less frequent. He ate well, slept through the night, and showed more interest in playing, learning, and talking to others. Emily kept track of his progress in her notes. She noticed that he was more confident, asking more questions and expressing his thoughts. Claire joined in activities with him, helping him with crafts, puzzles, and stories. Jonathan also spent more quality time with his son, creating a stronger bond than before. The house's quiet, stable routine played a big role in Ethan's development. The predictable structure helped him feel secure. There were no more surprises, no fear, and no pressure. Every day felt normal, and that normal feeling helped Ethan grow. His personality became brighter, and everyone could see the positive changes. The progress felt real, and it gave hope to everyone living in the house. Even though the legal process had brought justice, no one in the house spent time talking about it anymore. The focus had shifted completely to living life in the present and building a better future. Jonathan continued to work while staying close to his family. Claire helped plan the final parts of the wedding, including choosing flowers, music, and small details for the ceremony. Ethan practiced his walk again and again, taking it seriously but also having fun. Emily balanced her time between the home, her studies, and her care for Ethan. The house functioned like a team now, with each person playing a different role. Everyone respected each other's space and needs. The peace in the house wasn't just about the absence of problems. It came from the way they all worked together. Each person had faced a difficult past, but none of them were stuck in it. The days were calm, steady, and filled with quiet hope for what was still to come. The wedding of Jonathan and Claire took place in the garden of their home. The day was carefully planned, with everything set up in a peaceful and beautiful way. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and soft decorations surrounded the space. The guests were close friends and family, people who had supported Jonathan and Claire during hard times. Emily was among them, sitting quietly, watching everything with calm joy. Ethan had an important role. He carried the rings. He walked slowly down the aisle, holding a small pillow, and handed the rings to Jonathan at the right moment. He was focused and proud, and everyone clapped gently when he reached the end. The ceremony continued with simple but meaningful words. There were no interruptions or problems. Everything went as planned. The garden, once a quiet place of recovery, now held a moment of happiness. The wedding marked not just a union of two people, but also the closing of a long, difficult chapter in their lives. After the ceremony, the guests stayed in the garden for a small celebration. There was soft music playing, and tables were set with light snacks and drinks. Everyone talked in low voices, enjoying the peaceful feeling in the air. Ethan stayed close to Jonathan and Claire, but looked for Emily when the music changed. He walked up to her and asked if she would dance with him. Emily smiled and agreed. They danced slowly, and Ethan looked happy. He told her that he liked seeing everyone together and that it made him feel good. He said he was glad his family was finally whole again. Emily didn't say much, but she felt touched by his words. The boy, who had once been sick and quiet, was now speaking freely and showing emotion. That small moment between them said a lot about how far he had come. It also reminded Emily why she had stayed through everything, to see this very moment happen. As the evening moved on, guests began saying their goodbyes. The sun had gone down, and the lights around the garden gave everything a warm look. Claire walked over to Emily and handed her a small gift. It was a delicate locket. Inside was a simple note thanking her for everything she had done. Claire spoke gently, saying that Emily's care for Ethan had changed everything. She said the family would always be thankful for the protection and strength Emily had shown during difficult times. Emily didn't expect anything, so the gift took her by surprise. She held it carefully and nodded in appreciation. Jonathan also joined them and added that Emily was not just a helper or employee. She was an important part of the house. He said things would not have reached this point without her presence. His words were sincere. Emily didn't need long speeches. The meaning behind their actions and words was clear, and that was enough for her. After the last guests left, the garden was quiet again. The decorations still hung in place, and the house lights glowed softly. Emily walked back inside with Ethan, who was clearly tired after a long and exciting day. He held her hand and leaned against her arm as they walked upstairs. In his room, she helped him change into comfortable clothes and tucked him into bed. He looked up at her and said, "Thank you." It was simple, but the way he said it made her stop. He told her that he remembered when he felt sick all the time and that he knew she had helped him get better. Emily sat by the bed for a few minutes, gently brushing his hair back. She didn't need to say anything else. His words meant more than anything. Watching him sleep, she knew that everything had been worth it. The hard days, the difficult choices, and the risk she had taken had all led to this quiet, safe night. As the house grew even quieter, Emily walked through the hallway. She passed the rooms, all in order. The spaces that had once felt heavy and tense now felt light and clean. No doors were locked, no strange smells came from the kitchen, and no one watched from the shadows. The home had changed. It wasn't just about new furniture or repainted walls. It was the feeling that was different now. Peace had replaced fear. Trust had replaced doubt. Every part of the house reflected the changes the family had gone through. Emily returned to her room and placed the locket on her nightstand. She looked at it for a moment before getting ready for bed. Outside, the garden lights were still on, gently lighting the space where the wedding had taken place. Inside, everything was still and calm. The family was safe, the child was healing, and the people in the house were finally resting without worry. The storm had passed, and the house stood whole again. The end of the night marked more than the end of a wedding day. It was the quiet end of a long period of difficulty and the beginning of something new. For a long time, the house had been a place of mystery, stress, and illness. But now it had been transformed into a place of recovery, stability, and happiness. Jonathan and Claire were starting their married life. Ethan was healthy and stronger every day. Emily had found her place and was continuing her studies with hope for her future. The home was no longer filled with questions, secrets, or fear. It was filled with normal routines, shared meals, learning, laughter, and care. The chapter that involved Helen, her actions, and all the danger she caused had closed completely. The family didn't need to forget it, but they no longer had to live in its shadow. The house remained still that night, not empty, but full, with peace, purpose, and a quiet sense of completion. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Now that you've finished watching this incredible story, click on my profile picture and access my videos. I'm sure you'll be enchanted by all the good stories about justice and kindness. Enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.